There is a photograph that does not exist. It would show a man covered in dust and German blood, wearing the uniform of his enemy, standing alone in an olive grove on an island where thousands were dying. The man in this photograph would be holding a rifle that did not belong to him. His hands would be shaking. His eyes would be looking at something the camera could not capture, the weight of what he had just done, and what he knew he would have to do again. The photograph does not exist because no one was there to take it, but the man was real. His name was Alfred Clive Hume, and for 6 days in May 1941, he became something the manuals never mentioned, something his commanders never trained him for, something he would spend the rest of his life trying to forget. This is not a story about heroism. This is a story about what happens when a single soldier decides that the only way to save his friends is to become indistinguishable from the men killing them. The heat on Crete in late May was not the comfortable warmth of a Mediterranean spring. It was the kind of heat that made metal burn to touch, that turned sweat into salt crust on skin, that made breathing feel like inhaling dust. Sergeant Alfred Hume stood in that heat on the morning of May 20th, 1941, watching 3 men dig a trench they did not want to dig. The men were on punishment detail. Minor infractions, the kind that happen when soldiers have been waiting too long for something to happen. Hume was supervising them because someone had to, and because he was the kind of soldier who did what he was told without complaint. He was 28 years old, a New Zealander, part of the 2nd New Zealand Expeditionary Force. He had a wife back home. He had a younger brother somewhere else on the island, also in uniform. He had no particular ambitions, beyond surviving the war and going home. The 3 men dug slowly. The ground was hard. The sun was already high. Hume stood in what little shade an olive tree provided and watched the northern sky. He had been watching that sky for days. Everyone had been watching that sky. The Germans were coming. Everyone knew the Germans were coming. The question was not if, but when and how many, and whether the defenses would hold. The island had been evacuated from Greece only weeks before, a chaotic withdrawal that left equipment scattered and units mixed together. The forces on Crete were a patchwork: British, New Zealand, Australian, and Greek troops, many of them exhausted, most of them under-equipped. There were not enough artillery pieces. There were not enough machine guns. There were not enough trucks, radios, medical supplies, or ammunition. What they had was geography, a narrow island with mountains in the center, and a few key points along the northern coast. What they had were men who had already retreated once, and did not want to retreat again. The sound came first. A deep thrumming that seemed to come from everywhere at once, a mechanical drone that grew louder and louder until it drowned out every other sound on the island. Hume looked up. The men stopped digging. The sky to the north was dark with aircraft. Not a squadron, not a formation. An armada. Hundreds of transport planes, wave after wave, escorted by fighters that glinted in the sun like knives. The sound of their engines was so loud it seemed to press down on the ground, a physical force that made the chest vibrate. Then the sky began to bloom. White flowers opening against the blue, dozens of them, then hundreds, parachutes. The German airborne assault on Crete began at 8 in the morning and it did not stop. The first wave targeted the airfields, Malim, Rethymno, Heraklion. The second wave targeted the towns and roads. The paratroopers came down in groups, landing in olive groves on hillsides in the middle of defensive positions. Some were killed before they touched the ground. Some landed in trees and were shot while they hung helpless. Others landed, gathered their weapons, and began fighting immediately. The noise was constant. Aircraft engines, anti-aircraft fire, machine guns, rifles, grenades, shouting in 3 languages, the smell of cordite and aviation fuel mixed with the dust and the heat. Hume and his 3 charges scrambled to their position, grabbed their rifles, and began firing at the shapes descending from the sky. It was like shooting at ghosts. The parachutes moved in the wind. The range was difficult to judge. Some paratroopers landed hundreds of yards away. Others landed close enough that Hume could see their faces. By midday, the initial chaos had settled into a different kind of chaos. The German plan had been bold, but it had also been desperate. The paratroopers were lightly armed. They depended on speed and surprise. They needed to capture the airfields quickly so that reinforcements could be flown in. In most places, they failed. The Allied defenders, despite their lack of equipment, fought with a ferocity the Germans had not expected. Paratroopers were pinned down. Units were scattered. Officers were killed. But in other places, the Germans succeeded. They captured key positions. They established strong points. They began to coordinate, and they brought with them something that changed the nature of the battle in ways that became clear only as men began dying in ways that were different from before. The snipers appeared on the second day. At first, no one understood what was happening. Men would be moving between positions or sitting in cover or eating a meal, and they would simply fall. No warning, no sound until after the shot. The bullet would arrive before the crack of the rifle. By the time anyone turned to look, the shooter was gone. It was not like being shot at by ordinary riflemen. Ordinary riflemen fired from visible positions. You could see muzzle flash. You could hear the sustained fire. You could return fire or call for mortars or find cover. The German snipers were different. They were using scoped rifles, Mauser rifles modified for precision shooting. They were wearing camouflage smocks, modeled patterns that broke up their outline against the rocks and vegetation. They were trained in fieldcraft, in patience, in the specific discipline of waiting for the perfect shot. Some of them had been hunters before the war. Some had been competitive shooters. All of them were professionals. They did not fire unless they had a clear target. They did not fire unless they were certain of the kill. And after they fired, they moved. Hume saw the effect before he understood the cause. A lieutenant shot through the head while looking at a map. A signaller killed while trying to fix a radio. A medic killed while dragging a wounded man to safety. Each time a single shot. Each time from a direction no one could pinpoint. Each time the fear spread a little further. Soldiers began moving differently. They hunched when they walked. They flinched at shadows. They stopped trusting open ground. The psychological effect was as devastating as the casualties. A dozen men killed by snipers created fear in hundreds. Officers began ordering counter-sniper measures. Riflemen were told to watch the likely position, ridgelines, ruined buildings, dense vegetation. Machine gunners were told to spray fire at suspected locations. Mortars were called in to bombard areas where snipers might be hiding. None of it worked. The German snipers were too careful. They did not stay in one place. They did not fire from obvious positions. They understood that their value was not just in the men they killed, but in the disruption they caused, the fear they created, the way they forced the defenders to waste time and ammunition shooting at positions where no one was hiding. On the third day, Hume was moving through an olive grove with two other men when the soldier ahead of him dropped. No warning, just the crack of a rifle and the man falling forward into the dirt. The other soldier dove for cover. Hume did the same, pressing himself flat behind a low stone wall. He waited. His heart was hammering. He could hear his own breathing. The wounded man was 15 feet away, still alive, making sounds that were not quite words. Hume knew he should not move. He knew the sniper was watching, waiting for someone to try to help, but the man was dying. Hume made his decision. He crawled toward the wounded soldier, keeping low, moving slowly. The shot did not come. He reached the man, grabbed his webbing, and began dragging him back toward the wall. Halfway there, he saw the sniper. The German was 100 yards away, lying prone on a slight rise, partially concealed by scrub. He was wearing a camouflage smock that blended almost perfectly with the gray-green vegetation. He was aiming at something else, perhaps waiting for another target. Hume dragged the wounded man behind the wall and then looked back. The sniper was still there, still focused elsewhere. Hume brought his rifle up slowly. The range was long for a standard infantry rifle without optics. The target was small and partially concealed. Hume had been a good shot before the war, hunting rabbits and deer in the hills of New Zealand. He steadied his breathing. He aimed not at the man, but at the space the man occupied. He fired 3 times in quick succession. The first shot hit the dirt. The second hit something, he saw dust fly. The third shot struck the sniper in the upper body. The figure jerked and went still. Hume waited another 10 minutes before moving. When he finally reached the position, the German was dead. The man was young, perhaps 25, with pale skin and light hair. His rifle was a Carabiner 98 with a scope mounted on top, a weapon far superior to anything the Allied troops carried. His camouflage smock was made of cotton, printed with an irregular pattern of browns and greens. It had pockets filled with loose ammunition. The dead man's face was calm. He looked like he could have been sleeping if not for the blood. Hume stood there for a long moment looking down at what he had done. He had killed men before. War was killing. But this felt different. This felt personal. He had looked for this man. He had hunted him. And now the man was dead, and Hume was standing over his body in an olive grove on an island neither of them had heard of before this year. Hume took the rifle. He took the camouflage smock. He took the ammunition. He did not tell anyone what he was planning. He did not ask permission. He simply did it. He put the smock on over his own uniform. It smelled of sweat and tobacco. It felt wrong wearing it. It felt like a betrayal of something, though he could not say what. But it worked. When he looked at himself, he saw what the Germans would see, another paratrooper dressed like them, moving like them. And that gave him an idea. The German airborne assault on Crete had succeeded in some places and failed in others, but everywhere it had created chaos. Paratroopers had landed scattered across miles of terrain. Some groups had linked up, others had not. Communication was difficult. The radios were often destroyed in the landing. Officers did not know where their men were. Men did not know where their officers were. In the confusion, units moved independently, trying to find objectives, trying to regroup, trying to survive. The Germans were aggressive and well-trained, but they were also disoriented. They were fighting in unknown terrain against an enemy that knew the ground. They were surrounded by civilians who hated them. They were stretched thin, holding positions that were under constant counterattack. In that chaos, no one questioned a lone paratrooper moving through the lines. Hume began moving at night. He wore the camouflage smock and carried the scoped rifle. From a distance in the dark, he looked like any other German soldier. He moved slowly, carefully, staying in cover, watching for patrols. When he encountered German positions, he did not avoid them. He walked toward them. He walked with the posture of a man who belonged there, tired and alert and focused on the task at hand. Several times, Germans saw him and nodded or waved or called out something in a language he did not understand. He waved back. He kept moving. The boldness of it was its own protection. No one expected an enemy soldier to simply walk through their positions. No one expected deception of that kind. His targets were the snipers. He had learned to identify them by their movement and their equipment. They moved alone or in pairs. They carried the distinctive scoped rifles. They positioned themselves carefully, often on the edges of German defensive positions where they had fields of fire but could withdraw quickly. Hume would find them during the day, watching through binoculars, noting their positions. Then he would approach at dusk or dawn, when visibility was poor, when men were tired and less alert. He would walk up to them as if he belonged, and then, when he was close enough, he would kill them. The first time he did this, his hands shook so badly he could barely hold the knife he carried. The German sniper was alone, lying in a shallow scrape on a hillside, watching the valley below. Hume approached from behind, moving quietly through the rocks. The German heard something and turned. He saw Hume in the camouflage smock and said something, a question perhaps, or a greeting. Hume stepped forward and drove the knife upward under the ribcage. The man gasped. His eyes went wide. He tried to bring his rifle around, but he was already dying. Hume held him as he fell, lowering him silently to the ground. It took less than 30 seconds. Hume took the rifle and the ammunition and walked away. He was violating every convention of warfare. He was wearing enemy uniform. He was fighting as a saboteur, not a soldier. If captured, he would be executed. But he did not think about capture. He thought about the men in his unit. He thought about the lieutenant with the map. He thought about the medic. He thought about all the men who would die if these snipers were not stopped. Over the next 2 days, he killed 4 more snipers. Each time was different. Each time was the same. The approach, the sudden violence, the weight of it afterward. He did not keep count. He did not take trophies. He simply did what he believed needed to be done. The effect was immediate. The German sniper teams began to report problems. Their positions were being compromised. Their men were disappearing. The Allied casualties from sniper fire dropped dramatically. Men began moving with less fear. Officers noticed but did not understand why. Hume told no one. He returned to his unit between missions, acted as if nothing had happened, slept when he could, and then went out again. On the 5th day, an officer found him and told him that his brother had been killed. Lieutenant Jack Hume, serving with another unit, had been killed in action 2 days earlier. The officer said he was sorry. The officer said Jack had died well, whatever that meant. Hume thanked him and walked away. He walked until he found a place where he could be alone. Then he sat down and put his head in his hands. He did not cry. He had no tears left. He simply sat there, feeling the weight of it, the unfairness of it, the arbitrary cruelty of war. Jack had been 26. Jack had been supposed to go home. Jack had been supposed to survive. And now Jack was dead and Hume was still alive, and nothing about that made sense. That night Hume went out again, but something had changed. Before, he had been methodical, almost clinical. Now there was something else driving him. It was not rage. Rage was too simple. It was closer to desperation, a need to make his brother's death mean something, to prevent more deaths, to strike back at the machinery of war that had taken Jack and was taking everyone else. He moved faster. He took more risks. He killed 3 snipers that night, working through the German positions with a cold efficiency that frightened him when he thought about it later. But in the moment, he did not think. He simply acted. By the 6th day, the battle had turned. The Germans had captured Malim airfield. Reinforcements were pouring in. The Allied commanders made the decision to withdraw. The order came down to fall back to Ceuta Bay, where ships would attempt an evacuation. It was a retreat, another retreat, and everyone knew what that meant. Some would escape. Many would not. The withdrawal was conducted under constant pressure from German forces. The Germans attacked from the air. They attacked on the ground. They pushed hard, trying to turn the retreat into a rout. The rearguard units fought desperate actions to slow them down, to buy time for the main body to escape. Hume was with a rear guard position on the morning of May 27th. His unit was holding a ridge overlooking the main withdrawal route. German forces were pressing forward. Artillery fire was falling around the position. Aircraft were strafing the road below. And the snipers were back. 2 men were hit in quick succession. Then a machine gun team went silent. The Germans were setting up a mortar position in a grove 600 yards away, preparing to rain fire on the retreating column. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. In another hour, the position would be overrun. Hume looked at the German position. He looked at his rifle. He still had the camouflage smock. He made his decision. He told the sergeant in charge that he was going forward. The sergeant told him he was insane. Hume went anyway. He moved down from the ridge, crossed open ground in short rushes, and entered the German-held area. He was past the point of caution. He was past the point of fear. He walked through the German positions like a man who had nothing left to lose. A group of paratroopers called out to him. He waved and kept walking. An officer said something sharp. Hume gestured toward the ridge as if reporting and continued forward. He reached the mortar position. There were 4 men there, 2 working the mortar, 2 providing security. Hume walked up to them and opened fire. He killed 2 before they understood what was happening. The 3rd man dove for cover and Hume shot him as he moved. The 4th man got his rifle up and fired. The bullet hit Hume in the left shoulder, a burning impact that spun him halfway around. He stayed on his feet and fired back. The German went down. Hume turned toward the sniper positions he had identified earlier. There were 2 of them, both now turning toward the sound of gunfire. Hume shot the first one through the chest. The second one fired and missed. Hume did not. By now the entire area was in uproar. Germans were shouting. Troops were running toward the sound of shooting. Hume turned and ran. He made it halfway back to the Allied lines before another bullet hit him, this time in the leg. He went down hard, tumbling into a drainage ditch. He could hear Germans shouting behind him. He could hear rifle fire. He crawled. The pain in his leg was extraordinary, a white-hot agony that made it difficult to think. He kept crawling. Another bullet hit the ground near his head. He heard voices close now, and he thought this was it. This was where he died, alone in a ditch on an island he would never leave. Then hands grabbed him. Allied hands. Men from his unit pulling him back, dragging him up the ridge while others laid down covering fire. They got him to safety. A medic looked at the wounds and shook his head. Hume had lost a lot of blood. The shoulder wound was bad. The leg wound was worse, but he was alive. They evacuated him that night, loading him onto a truck with other wounded, driving through the darkness toward Ceuta Bay. The truck was strafed twice by German aircraft. Men died in the back of that truck. Hume did not. He was put on a ship, a destroyer that made a high-speed run through waters controlled by German aircraft. The ship was attacked repeatedly. Bombs fell close enough to throw water over the decks. The ship's guns fired until the barrels were hot, but the ship made it through. Hume made it through. He was taken to Egypt, then to a hospital where doctors worked to repair what could be repaired. He would keep the leg, but it would never work right again. The shoulder would heal but would always cause pain. He would carry the scars for the rest of his life. The Victoria Cross was awarded to Sergeant Alfred Clive Hume on the 14th of October, 1941. The citation described his actions in vague terms. It mentioned exceptional gallantry. It mentioned repeated acts of bravery. It mentioned the destruction of enemy positions under fire. It did not mention the camouflage smock. It did not mention the infiltration. It did not mention the specific nature of what he had done. That information was classified. The commanders who recommended him for the award understood that what Hume had accomplished was extraordinary, but they also understood that it was problematic. Wearing enemy uniform was a violation of the laws of war. It was effective, but it was not something that could be officially condoned. So the citation was worded carefully. The truth was buried in paperwork that few people would ever read. Hume received the medal in a ceremony in Egypt. He stood there in his dress uniform, his leg still causing him pain, and accepted the decoration from a general whose name he did not remember later. There were photographers. There were other officers. There was applause. Hume felt nothing. He thought about Jack. He thought about the men he had killed. He thought about the men he had saved, if he had saved any at all. He did not feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had done terrible things for reasons that had seemed clear at the time, but now seemed muddled and distant. The general shook his hand. The ceremony ended. Hume went back to his hospital bed. He was invalided home to New Zealand in 1942. He was met with parades and speeches. The newspapers called him a hero. People wanted to hear his story. He gave a few interviews, saying as little as possible. He described the German invasion. He described the fighting. He did not describe the infiltration. When pressed, he changed the subject. People assumed he was being modest. In truth, he simply did not want to talk about it. What he had done on Crete was not a story he wanted to tell. It was a weight he carried, a knowledge that sat in his chest and never quite went away. The nightmare started later. Dreams of walking through enemy positions, of being discovered, of killing men who looked at him with surprise and betrayal. Dreams of Jack, calling out to him from somewhere he could not reach. He tried to go back to civilian life. He married his sweetheart. He tried to work, but the leg made many jobs impossible. The shoulder made others difficult. More than that, he found it hard to connect with the world he had left behind. People talked about the war as if it were a story, something with clear sides and meaning and purpose. Hume knew it was not a story. It was chaos and fear and decisions made in seconds that echoed for years. He withdrew. He spoke less and less about Crete. When people asked, he said he had been a soldier and he had done his duty. Nothing more. The Battle of Crete was a defeat. The Germans won. They captured the island, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The German airborne forces suffered such devastating casualties that Hitler never authorized another major airborne operation. The price was too high. The parachute divisions that landed on Crete were gutted. Some units lost half their strength. The Allies evacuated thousands of troops, though thousands more were captured. The island remained under German occupation until 1945. In the grand strategic calculus of the war, Crete was a footnote. The real battles were fought elsewhere. The outcome of the war was decided in Russia and North Africa and Normandy and the Pacific. What one sergeant did or did not do on an island in May 1941 made no difference to any of that. But it made a difference to the men in his unit. It made a difference to the soldiers who did not die from sniper fire. It made a difference to the rear guard that was not destroyed by mortar fire. In the narrow slice of the war that Hume occupied in the small, brutal calculus of survival and death, his actions mattered. He saved lives. How many is impossible to calculate? Dozens, perhaps more. Each of those men went on to fight other battles, to survive or not survive, to go home or not go home. The ripples spread outward in ways that could never be traced. The method Hume used was never officially adopted. After the war, military historians studied what he had done. Some praised his initiative. Others condemned the violation of the laws of war. No army created a doctrine based on his actions. No manual was written describing the technique. The use of enemy uniforms remained prohibited. The reasons were practical and ethical. Practical because such tactics could lead to retaliation, to the breakdown of the conventions that made war something other than total mutual slaughter. Ethical because there were lines that needed to be maintained, even in war, especially in war. What Hume had done was effective. It was also dangerous, not just physically but morally. It was the kind of thing that could not be institutionalized, without changing the nature of the armies that did it. Hume lived until 1976. He was 53 years old when he died, still young by any reasonable measure, but aged by the war and the wounds that never fully healed. He spoke very little about Crete in the decades after the war. When his children asked, he told them he had been a soldier. When veterans gathered, he attended but said little. He kept the Victoria Cross in a drawer. He did not display it. He did not talk about what it represented. The few times journalists tried to interview him about his experiences, he declined. The story that emerged in the official histories and the military records was sanitized, heroic, uncomplicated. The real story stayed with him. In his final years, he would sometimes sit alone and think about that week in May. He would think about the heat and the dust and the sound of aircraft. He would think about the German sniper he killed, the first one, the young man with pale skin who looked like he was sleeping. He would think about Jack. He would think about whether any of it had mattered. The world had moved on. The war had ended. The island was returned to Greece. The men who fought there were old or dead. The battles were historical events, studied by scholars, commemorated in ceremonies, slowly fading from living memory into the abstract past. But for Hume, it was never abstract. It was the weight of decisions made in seconds. It was the knowledge of what he had become, however briefly, in that olive grove. It was the question that had no answer, whether doing a terrible thing for a good reason made it any less terrible. The Victoria Cross citation remains in the archives. It describes valor and sacrifice. It describes a soldier who went beyond the call of duty. It is accurate as far as it goes, but it does not describe the man walking through German positions in a stolen smock. It does not describe the moment of decision when Hume chose to become something the enemy would not recognize until it was too late. It does not describe the weight of that choice, the way it changed him, the way it stayed with him. Those details were never recorded. They existed only in Hume's memory, and when he died, they died with him. What remains is the question every soldier who does something extraordinary must face, and the question that no medal can answer. Did it matter? In the vast scope of the war, in the millions dead and the world transformed, did one sergeant's actions on one island change anything? The strategic answer is no. The Battle of Crete was lost. The war continued. History moved forward on currents far larger than any individual action. But in the small, brutal world of men trying to survive one more day, in the mathematics of who lived and who died, the answer is different. The answer is that it mattered to the men who walked where snipers had been. It mattered to the rear guard that was not destroyed. It mattered in ways that could never be quantified but were no less real for that. Sergeant Alfred Clive Hume made a choice. He chose to do something no manual prepared him for, something no order required of him, something that violated the conventions of warfare but saved the lives of men who would otherwise have died. He paid for that choice with wounds that never healed and memories that never faded. He received recognition he never wanted and carried a weight that could not be shared. Whether his actions can be justified, whether such tactics have a place in war, whether the end can ever truly justify the means, these are questions that have no simple answers. They are questions each generation must answer for itself, knowing that the men who face them in reality pay a price that those who debate them in theory can never fully understand. If you have watched until now, you have been part of that question. You have followed one man through 6 days that define the rest of his life. Now it is your turn to decide. Do you believe that what Sergeant Hume did change the outcome for those men on Crete? Do you believe that such tactics, born of desperation and executed at such terrible personal cost, can ever be justified in war? There are no right answers, only honest ones. If this story has moved you, if it has made you think, then please consider subscribing to this channel. Leave a like if you believe stories like this deserve to be told and remembered. And in the comments, tell me what you think. Tell me whether you believe that in the chaos and horror of war, when lives hang in the balance, a single soldier's choice can matter. Tell me whether Hume was a hero or something else entirely. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. And may we never forget the price that men like Alfred Clive Hume paid for choices they should never have had to make.